unite to save capitalism. It used to be the workers of the world uniting to achieve something, but now the social democrats of the world must unite to save capitalism. I've already illustrated how the facts, so far as Australia is concerned, don't fit this particular thesis. And an examination of the British experience reveals the same contradiction for the Prime Minister. Those who studied her remarkable period in government will know that three of the most prominent features of Margaret Thatcher's economic program were industrial relations reform, a deference to monetarism as an economic doctrine, and privatisation of government assets. Thatcher's policies in these three areas were embraced by the Blair government, in which Gordon Brown served as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Indeed, one of Tony Blair's defining moments in his early years as Prime Minister of Great Britain was when he addressed the Trade Union Congress and told them that fairness in the workplace started with the chance of a job. Blair was very proud of the fact that he maintained the essential components of Margaret Thatcher's industrial relations reforms. Not for him the turning back of an historic change for the better. And equally proud was Gordon Brown of his decision to give the Bank of England independence in setting interest rates, which incidentally followed what Peter Costello and I had done almost a year earlier in relation to the Reserve Bank here in Australia. Monetarists were well pleased with both decisions. Even the Reagan administration did not pursue unrestrained free market policies. It intervened very directly with billions of dollars to protect depositors and restructure the thrift institutions after the savings and loan collapses of the 1980s. In his essay, Mr. Rudd rails against the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which is sort of getting a bit of coverage in the financial press these days because of its relevance to what's happened in the United States. And that act decreed that commercial and investment banks should remain separate. And he says, and I'll quote his very words, "In the United States, the pursuit of financial deregulation crossed the Rubicon with the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which had been established in the wake of the Great Depression," end of quote. Well, if the Rubicon had been crossed by the repeal of that act, then the crossing was led by the centre-left American Democrats during the Clinton administration, albeit with some Republican support. Not surprisingly, the Prime Minister has singled out Wall Street as the major crime scene of the neoliberals. And we can only wonder at the political motives involved in not likewise designating the square mile of the City of London as a crime scene as well. Because according to my observation, the use of many of the exotic financial instruments of the recent decade or more, including the dreaded derivatives, have been just as prevalent in the City of London as they have been on Wall Street. We all do face a very difficult economic climate. There will be legitimate differences in our responses reflecting our different experiences and our different philosophies. Nothing, however, will be achieved by stretching the facts to serve an unsustainable economic proposition designed to score a base political point. Our current predicament is not the result of some malign economic philosophy having held total sway for the past 30 years. If so, that philosophy, to a lesser or greater extent, has beguiled both sides of the political divide in many countries. In reality, the causes of the problems we now confront are a lot more prosaic than that. In the past 30 years, the freer functioning of markets inherently involved in the globalisation process has lifted hundreds of millions of people around the world out of poverty. And competitive capitalism has been integral to this historic development. So far from failing, it has succeeded. In the process, some regulation has failed and some have not been enforced. In some instances, governments have not intervened enough. In others, such as through Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, in the United States in relation to the spread of subprime mortgage investments, governments, their agencies and legislators have intervened far too much. What matters now, both here in Australia and around the world, is how we respond. Our circumstances here in Australia do not warrant a knee-jerk return to the policies that delivered stagflation in the 1970s and early 80s. We should not be panicked into financial profligacy and the burdening of future generations of Australians with huge amounts of debt. We in the Liberal Party know that it took 10 years to repay the $96 billion of government debt left behind by Mr Keating. We can only contemplate the length of time needed to liquidate the $200 billion of debt, at the very least, that our nation now faces as a consequence of recent policy decisions. Malcolm Turnbull and his colleagues were absolutely right to oppose the government stimulus package. It needlessly plunges Australia deeply into debt with a poorly targeted spending spree. If the principal concern of the government, as it should be, is to preserve jobs, then the government's revenue and expenditure measures should, in addition to being more modest, have been directed overwhelmingly towards reducing the cost for Australian firms of retaining their existing staff and removing impediments for taking on new employees. Because even in a recession, some firms hire new workers. Let me conclude by wishing the federal opposition great good fortune in the months ahead. Can I observe that the remarkably strong budget position bequeathed by the Coalition has given the Rudd government a much easier start than was the lot of just about any other government coming to office in Australia since World War II. And decisions adversely affecting the financial positions of individuals have yet to be taken. The inevitable realities of government will soon confront Mr Rudd and his colleagues. And can I, as an old observer of political pendulums and marginal seat aspirations, make one concluding observation, and that is this, that if one looks at the changes of government that have occurred in Australia since World War II, the incoming government has, except in 2 occasions, had very, very large majorities. The Menzies government had a very big majority in a much smaller parliament in 1949, and of course the Fraser government had a huge majority in 1975, and we had a very large majority in 1996. The exceptions, of course, and the Hawke government had quite a comfortable majority in a smaller parliament in 1983. But Mr Rudd's majority is roughly comparable to the majority obtained by Gough Whitlam in 1972. And the point I make is that so far as the margin of seats is concerned, his majority is nowhere near as comfortable as some commentators are suggesting. And I would simply make the observation that although the task that faces Malcolm and his colleagues is very, very steep indeed, and he would be the first to acknowledge it, it is not unattainable. And in the particular circumstances in which Australia now finds itself, I know that the last thing on the minds of any of my former federal parliamentary colleagues would be anything other than maximising the opportunities to inflict political damage on their opponents between now and the next election. I conclude by thanking the Menzies Research Centre again. I wish it well. It's an important contributor to the intellectual renewal process of the Liberal Party. And can I finally say on an equally personal note how happy I am to be back in Melbourne, to see so many of my old friends from the Victorian Division, and to say to you, David and Tony, thank you again on behalf of all of the members of the party in Victoria for the tremendous support and encouragement they gave me through good years and bad for so long. I will ever be very grateful to you. Thank you.